Chapter 8 Knitting and More Knitting. Paris, around the same time, Devarge's wine shop. There had been earlier drinking than usual in the wine shop of Monsieur Devarge. As early as 6 o'clock in the morning, pale faces looking through its barred windows had seen other faces within bending over their wine. This had been the third morning in which there had been early drinking at the wine shop of Monsieur Devarge. In spite of the unusual number of customers, the master of the wine shop wasn't to be seen. He wasn't missed, for nobody who came in looked for him, nobody asked for him, nobody was surprised to see only Madame Devarge in her seat, presiding over the distribution of wine. It was noon when two dusty men passed through the street and under the swinging lamps. One was Monsieur Devarge, the other a road repairer in a blue cap. No one had followed them, and no man spoke when they entered the wine shop, though the eyes of every man there were turned upon them. "Good day, gentlemen," said Monsieur Devarge. There was an answer from all of them. "It's bad weather, gentlemen," said Devarge, shaking his head. At this every man looked at his neighbor, and then they all looked down and sat in silence, except one man, who got up and went out. "My wife," said Devarge aloud, speaking to Madame Devarge, "I have traveled a long way with this good road repairer called Jack. I met him by accident a day and a half's journey from Paris. Give him a drink, my wife." A second man got up and went out. Madame Devarge put down some wine in front of the man called Jack, who took off his blue cap and drank. From his shirt he pulled out some rough dark bread, which he began to eat. A third man got up and went out. Devarge stood waiting until the man from the country had finished his breakfast. He didn't look at anyone there, and no one now looked at him, not even Madame Devarge, who had taken up her knitting and was at work. "Have you finished eating, friend?" he asked after some time. "Yes, thank you." "Come then, I'll show you the place where I said you could stay. It will suit you perfectly." Out of the wine shop into a yard, up a steep staircase, to the very top where formerly a white-haired man sat at a bench, bending forward, very busy making shoes. No white-haired man was there now, but the three men were there who had gone out of the wine shop, one after the other. Between them and the white-haired man there was one small link. They had once looked in at him through the holes in the wall. Devarge closed the door carefully and spoke in quiet voice. "Jack 1, Jack 2, Jack 3. This is the witness whom I, Jack 4, arranged to meet. He will tell you everything. Speak, Jack 5." The road repairer, blue cap in hand, wiped his forehead with it and said, "Where shall I begin?" "Begin," was Devarge's not unreasonable reply at the beginning. "I saw him then," began the road repairer, "a year ago this summer, underneath the carriage of the Marquise, hanging by the chain. This was how it was. I was leaving my work on the road. The sun was going down. The Marquise carriage was slowly going up the hill. The man hanging by the chain like this." Again the road repairer went through his performance, which ought to have been perfect by this time, as he had been entertaining the village with it for a whole year. Jack 1 interrupted and asked if he had ever seen this man before. "Never," answered the road repairer, standing up straight again. Jack 3 asked how he recognized him afterwards. Then, "By his tall figure," came the reply. "When the Marquis asked that evening, 'Say, what was he like?' I replied, 'Tall as a ghost.' You should have said, 'Short as a dwarf,'" replied Jack 2. "But what did I know? The murder hadn't happened then. I didn't offer to speak. The Marquis pointed at me with his finger and said to me, 'Bring that rascal.' Believe me, sirs, I offered nothing. He is right there, Jack, murmured Devarge to the man who had interrupted. Go on. Good, said the road repairer. The tall man was lost, and they were looking for him for how many months? 9, 10, 11? The number doesn't matter, said Devarge. He was well hidden, but at last they found him. Unluckily, go on. I was again at work on the hillside, and the sun was going down. I was collecting my tools to go to my cottage down in the village, where it was already dark, when I raised my eyes and saw 6 soldiers coming over the hill. In the middle was a tall man with his arms tied to his sides, like this. With the aid of his blue cap, he showed how the man was tied with arms at his side. I stood aside, sirs, by a pile of stones, to let the soldiers and the prisoner pass. I didn't show the soldiers that I recognized the tall man. He didn't show the soldiers that he recognized me. He did, and we knew it with our eyes. Come on, said the leader of the soldiers, pointing to the village. Bring him quickly to his tomb, and they brought him fast. I followed. His arms were swollen because they were tied so tightly. His wooden shoes were large and badly fitting, and he was lame and slow as a result. They drove him forward with their guns, like this. He showed how the soldiers used the ends of their guns to push him forward. For some days we saw him in an iron cage next to the prison. He went on to tell how they built a great gallows by the fountain in the village. On top of the gallows they fixed a knife pointing upwards. They hanged him there 40 feet high, and they left him hanging over the fountain, poisoning the water. They looked at one another as he again used his blue cap to wipe his face as he remembered the sight. It's frightful, sirs. How can the women and children draw water? Who can stop and talk in the evening under that shadow? He said. That's all, sirs. I left at sunset, as I had been warned to do, and I walked that night and half the next day until I met, as I was warned I would, this friend. With him I came here. After a gloomy silence, the first Jack said, Good, you have acted and told us your story well. Will you wait for us a little while outside the door? Very willingly, said the road repairer. Devarge took him to the top of the stairs, and leaving him there, returned to the others. What do you say, Jack? Demanded number 1. To be registered. To be registered as doomed to destruction, replied Devarge. The chateau and all of them. The chateau and all of them, replied Devarge. They are to be destroyed. Are you sure that no trouble can come from keeping this register? Without doubt, it's safe, for no one other than us knows what it means. But will we always know what it means, or ought I to say, will she? Jack, replied Devarge, if Madame, my wife, agrees to keep the register in her memory, she will not lose a word of it, not even a letter of it. Knit in her own stitches and her own symbols, it will always be as clear to her as the sun. Trust in Madame Devarge. It would be easier for the weakest creature that lives to remove himself from existence than to remove one letter of his name or crimes from the knitted register of Madame Devarge. The following day, Devarge set the road repairer on his long journey back to the village. At the guardhouse, he spoke to one of the policemen whom he knew well. Back at the wine shop, he said to Madame Devarge, "Jack of the police tells me that there is another spy taken on for our part of Paris. There may be many more for all that he can say, but he knows of one." Well, said Madame Devarge, raising her eyebrows with a cool business air, "it's necessary to register him. What's his name?" "He is English, so much the better. His name?" "Barsad," said Devarge, making it French by pronunciation. But he had been so careful to get it correctly that he then spelt it perfectly. "Barsad," repeated Madame. "Good. First name?" "John." "John Barsad," repeated Madame, after murmuring it once to herself. "Good. His appearance, is it known?" "Age about 40, height about 5 feet, nice inches, generally rather handsome, black hair, dark eyes, long thin face, and a long nose bent toward the left cheek." Is it a portrait?" said Madame, laughing. "He shall be registered." Around noon the next day, the admirable woman was in her usual place in the wine shop, knitting busily. There was a rose beside her, and if now and then she glanced at the flower, it was with no change of her preoccupied air. There were a few customers, drinking and not drinking, standing or seated. A figure entered at the door and threw a shadow on Madame Devarge, which she felt to be a new one. She put down her knitting and began to place the rose in her hair before she looked at the figure. It was curious. The moment Madame Devarge picked up the rose, the customers stopped talking. One by one, they left the wine shop. "Good day, Madame," said the newcomer. "Good day, Monsieur." She said it aloud, but added to herself as she took up her knitting again. "Ha, good day. Age about 40, height about 5 feet 9 inches, generally rather handsome, black hair, dark eyes, long thin face, and a long nose bent towards the left cheek. Good day, one and all. Would you give me a little glass of old brandy and a mouthful of cool French water, Madame?" Madame did as requested with a polite air. "Excellent brandy, this, Madame." It was the first time anyone had made a compliment about the brandy, and Madame Devarge knew better. She said, however, that the brandy was pleased to be complimented and took up her knitting. The visitor watched her fingers for a few moments and took the opportunity to observe the place in general. "You knit with great skill, Madame." "I am used to it. A pretty pattern, too." "You think so?" said Madame Devarge, looking at him with a smile. "Indeed. May I ask what it is for?" "Pastime," said Madame Devarge, still looking at him with a smile while her fingers moved quickly. "Not for use." "That depends. I may find a use for it one day. If I do well," said Madame Devarge, "I'll use it." It was remarkable, but the taste of the Saint Antoine district of Paris seemed to be opposed to a rose in the hair of Madame Devarge. Two men had entered separately and had been about to order a drink when, catching sight of that flower, they stopped pretending to look about for a friend who wasn't there and then went away. And of those who had been there when this visitor entered, there was none left. They had all gone. The spy had kept his eyes open but had been able to notice no sign. They had slipped away in a completely natural, accidental way. "John," thought Madame, checking her work as her fingers knitted, and her eyes looked at the stranger. "Stay long enough, and I shall knit." Barsad before you go. You have a husband, madam? I have. Children? No children. Business seems bad. Business is very bad. The people are so poor. Ah, the unfortunate, miserable people, so oppressed too, as you say. As you say, madame replied, correcting him and quickly putting something extra into his name that would do him no good. Pardon me? Certainly it was I who said so, but you naturally think so, of course? I think, replied madame, in a high voice, I and my husband have enough to do to keep this wine shop open without thinking. The spy, who was there to pick up any pieces of information he could find, didn't allow his confused state to show on his face, but stood with an air of gossiping gallantry, leaning his arm on the little counter and occasionally sipping his brandy. A bad business this, madam, of Gaspard's execution? Ah, poor Gaspard, he said, with a deep sigh. Well, said madame coolly and lightly, if people use knives for such purposes, they have to pay for it. He knew beforehand what the price would be, and he has paid the price. I believe, said the spy, dropping his voice to a tone that invited secrets to be revealed, that there is much sympathy and anger in his neighborhood about this poor fellow. Between ourselves, is there? Asked madame. Is there not? Here is my husband, said Madame Duvarge. As the keeper of the wine shop entered at the door, the spy touched his hat and said with a pleasant smile, Good day, Jack. Duvarge stopped and stared at him. Good day, Jack, the spy repeated with not quite so much confidence or quite so easy a smile under the stare. You are mistaken, monsieur, replied the keeper of the wine shop. You mistake me for another. That is not my name. I am Ernest Duvarge. It's all the same, said the spy, trying to hide his discomfort. Good day. Good day, answered Duvarge dryly. Having said that, he went behind the little counter and stood with his hand on the back of his wife's chair. The spy, well used to his work, didn't change his behavior but finished the glass of brandy, took a sip of fresh water and asked for another glass of brandy. Madame Duvarge poured it out for him, took to her knitting again, and hummed a little song. The pleasure of talking with you, Monsieur Duvarge, reminds me, the spy went on, that I have the honor of having some interesting associations with your name. Indeed, said Duvarge, without showing the slightest interest. Yes, indeed. When Dr. Manet was released from prison, you, his old servant, took care of him. I know he was brought to you. You see, I know all about this. Such is the fact, certainly, said Duvarge. He had understood from an accidental touch of his wife's arm as she knitted and sang to herself that he would do best to answer, but to keep it short, it was to you that his daughter came and took him over to England. Such is the fact, repeated Duvarge. I have known Dr. Manet and his daughter in England, yes, said Duvarge. You don't hear much about them now, said the spy. No, said Duvarge. In effect, no. Madame interrupted, looking up from her work and her little song. We never hear about them. We received news of their safe arrival, and perhaps another letter, or perhaps two. But since then they have gradually taken their road in the life, ours, and we have had no correspondence. Perfectly so, madam, replied the spy. She's going to be married. Going? Echoed madame. She was pretty enough to have been married long ago. You English are cold, it seems to be. Oh, you know I am English? I noticed that your tongue is. replied Madame. And what the tongue is, I suppose the man is. He didn't take this as a compliment, but he made the best of it and laughed. After sipping his brandy to the end, he added, "Yes, Miss Manet is going to be married, but not to an Englishman, to one who, like herself, is French by birth. And speaking of Gaspard, poor Gaspard, it was cruel, cruel. It's a curious thing that she is going to marry the nephew of the Marquis for whom Gaspard was hanged from such a height. In other words, the present Marquis, but he lives unknown in England. He is no Marquis there. He is Mr. Charles Darnay. D'Aulnoy is the name of his mother's family." Madame de Varges knitted without pausing, but the news had an effect on her husband. Despite himself, behind the little counter he was troubled, and his hand shook as he struck a light to light his pipe. The spy would have been no spy if he had failed to see it or to record it in his mind, having made at least this one hit, whatever it might prove to be worth, and no customers coming in to help him to any other. Mr. Parsad paid for what he had drunk and left. For some minutes after he had gone, the husband and wife remained exactly as he had left them, for fear that he might come back. Can it be true?" said Defarge in a low voice, looking down at his wife as he stood with his hand on the back of her chair. "What he has said of Mademoiselle Manet?" "As he has said it," replied Madame, raising her eyebrows a little. "It's probably false, but it may be true." "If it's," Defarge began and stopped. "If it's," repeated his wife. "And if it does come, I hope for her sake destiny will keep her husband out of France." "Her husband's destiny," said Madame Defarge with her usual coolness, "will take him where he is to go, and will lead to the end that is to end him. That is all I know, but it's very strange now, at least is it not very strange," said Defarge, rather begging his wife to admit it, "that after all our sympathy for Monsieur, her father, and herself, her husband's name should be on the register by the side of the Judge who has just left us. Stranger things than that will happen when it does come," answered Madame. "I have them both here, and they are both here because that is what they deserve. That is enough." She rolled up her knitting when she had said those words, and shortly thereafter took the rose out of her hair.